Cult leaders can know how to exploit that to make people feel like, well, this is where you get your belonging. And if you leave, you're not going to find belonging anymore. And I'm here to tell you, on the other end of this, if you do decide to step away, there is a whole vast community of us.
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
For inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I are going to catch up. And guess what? We've moved into our new old house. And we've got stories to share with you. Later on the pod, Missy and I sat down with Dr. Jamie Marich, who's got a brand new book out titled You Lied to Me About God, a Memoir. We have a really significant conversation with her. It is a great episode, so stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing quite well. And you?
Well, Mitch.
Yes, Missy.
Have you ever cleaned every square inch of a toilet after 6 months of construction?
No, but I've encouraged somebody as they cleaned every square inch of a house after construction.
Whatever. You had no idea it was even happening.
I did too.
So I'm dealing with a little bit of, and I don't.
Someone had me clean out the drawers with anti-mold
with
formula.
Vinegar, yes. So no, I don't want to minimize what we're talking about today in our interview because I don't think it's the same thing.
100%.
But so I wanted to come up with a different word besides traumatized because I don't want to say this is trauma-inducing because that's not. No. It's reducing the word. So I've come up with a new word. I have been dramatized.
That is excellent.
That is exactly what I'm
dramatized.
going. I've been dramatized. Mm-hmm. So these things that happen in your life where you're just, they're forever imprinted on you. You don't have to go to therapy. You've just got maybe a good story for, I don't know, a podcast. But I'm pretty sure cleaning every square inch of this toilet and the contortion involved to do this in, our smaller living situation has qualified me for, Cirque du Soleil, at least. So if you want to know how I am doing, I am dramatized.
You are dramatized. That sounds like a great t-shirt.
Also, so happy.
Yes.
We have spent our first couple of nights in our house that we've been renovating. Mm-hmm. We haven't been renovating. Let's not yes. No. We've been, finding others.
Well, you put some paint on the wall.
I mean, I painted the whole damn house. Sorry.
Yes, you did.
I mean, behind the toilets too.
Painted it and cleaned it.
Yes. And painting behind toilets is also a little bit dramatizing.
That's right.
But so we've spent our first few nights. I've been unpacking. You have to. We've been unpacking boxes, things that have been in storage for 6 months are now coming out to life and getting laundered or run through the dishwasher or doused in bleach, whatever we need to do. But do you remember once we packed everything up from our old house? Mm-hmm. And at the point when we realized we were going to be in this limbo situation for more than a couple of weeks, right? Okay. You know how you like to, you're a smoothie guy, right?
I'm a smoothie guy. That's right, yeah.
I am not.
No, you're not a smoothie person.
No. When I eat, I like to actually eat.
Yeah.
And if Cliff allows it, I will say, I like to masticate. For those of you clutching your pearls, that means to chew. Smoothies don't chew. You just drink. Yeah. Anyways, so I'm not a smoothie person. You are. So you have a fancy Ninja blender for your smoothies. Well, we packed it away thinking, okay, we're just going to be in this limbo situation for a few weeks, whatever. And about a month into it, you were like, hey, you know what? I really want to start, making my smoothies again for lunch. Where is, the blender stuff and my protein powder and blah, blah, blah. And I told you where it was, right?
Yeah. You told me exactly where it was.
Few weeks later, you kind of asked again. So about 3 or 4 times during the last 6 months, you've asked me where it was.
Yeah.
And I've been unpacking lately. And do you know where I found it?
Where?
Exactly where I told you it was.
Well, I'm glad your memory is working.
I apologize for yelling, but when I pulled it out of the bag that I told you it was in, that was accessible and not in the back of a storage unit. It's like,
I mean,
are you kidding me?
Because we didn't have a refrigerator at the time, I had to have something to look for, but couldn't find, even though it was right in front of my face.
Right. I mean, it was literally so close, within reach.
But it's been an exciting week. We got moved in. The movers came in, moved all the furniture in. And Missy, who showed up on moving day?
Oh, you guys. Okay, I'm so glad you brought this up. I was going to forget. So movers got here, and of course, when movers are here, you're leaving the doors open because they're bringing furniture in. And do you know who was the first to walk through the door hollering?
Cat.
Cat came in. I mean, he was just, I don't know how else to say it, hollering. I mean, Cat's meow, but no, he was just hollering at us and walking all through the house. Like a dog, honestly, he was inspecting every corner of the house, every closet, every nook and cranny. And this is a 100-year-old house. There are lots of nooks and crannies. And just walking all throughout. It was so funny. Yeah. He's just like, he had to check it out.
I mean, I think he works for the city of Norman, to be quite honest with
Probably so. We're like, what do we do? You can't like, here, boy, get a cat out of the house. We were like, here, cat. Here, cat.
A couple of dog people said, here, cat.
I mean, you're allergic, so we can't have him in for very long.
Right.
I finally ended up having to pick him up, and I look like you know, a teenage boy trying to hold a baby. I was like, I don't know how to hold a cat, so I picked him up and put him outside. So yes, Cat has blessed the house. At least that's the way I'm going to interpret it.
Absolutely.
So he has welcomed us to the neighborhood, and we've been able to walk to downtown for our first dinner out, which was so fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a long time coming, but we finally got here, and I am so excited to be living here close to downtown and in a 100-year-old house. I mean, still got some work to do, but it's enjoyable.
It's so fun, and I'm going to now that the dramatization of this renovation is not over, but you know, I'm coming into, dare I say, I can't say happy place. It's just not in me.
I was going to say.
Can I say contentment?
Content.
Okay. That's about as good as it gets for me.
Yeah.
I will start talking about it a little more. We'll start posting a little more. And I've created our hashtag.
Oh, really?
Yes.
What is it?
Randall's on Rich.
Oh, that's right. We live on Rich Street.
Yeah. And, you know, I thought about I shouldn't do that. But honestly, if somebody wanted to find out where we are for nefarious purposes, they could find out where we are, right?
Sure.
I mean, it's not hard to do. So
we got a cat who's willing to kill for us.
That's right. We have a guard cat, you guys.
Oh.
And if you don't believe me, I saw him walking away with a rat that was trying to get into our house the other day. So he will come at you. But yes, we are hashtag Randall's on Rich. So look forward to some new adventures as we embark on kind of a new little lifestyle for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, scanning the news this week, Missy, not a whole lot's been changed. We are getting closer and closer to the presidential election in November. Just want to encourage our listeners to keep educating themselves. Some good news this week coming out of Georgia that there were lines for early voting on the first day of early voting, which, is inspiring to see. I mean, it's democracy at work. And when you see lines on early voting that look similar to election day, it's like, wow, people are engaged.
Yeah. That is encouraging.
So that's very encouraging.
But did you hear about the rally this week?
You mean dance party?
The dance party this week. Okay.
I did hear about it.
I feel like I feel a little weird talking about it, but we have to talk about it because it's just such an odd thing.
Yeah.
There was a Trump rally in which he
was there for a town hall.
You're going to have to fill me in because I've just heard snippets.
Yeah, so he was there for a town hall with a governor in one of the Dakotas. And
like one of the Corinthians?
Yeah, one of the, two
Is it
Dakota.
one Dakota or two Dakota? It's two Dakota.
He was with two Dakota. And he was there for a town hall, which means, he's being interviewed and taking questions from the audience.
Yes.
Well, unfortunately, and this is really heartfelt, there were some medical complications in the audience. Well, that kind of sent the former president into a little bit of a tizzy, so to speak, very confused about what was going on.
It was very inconvenient.
Yeah. And so Trump decides just to shut down the Q&A in the town hall. But not only does he shut it down, he doesn't walk off the stage or says, "Thank you, I've got other places to go." He says, "Turn on the music." And the music starts to play, and it's like a really weird playlist.
So that's the thing. Like, I am all about a dance party. And I'm also all about, sometimes you got to cut off the preacher and just sing it out, right?
You do,
I mean, sometimes this is what you do. Mm-hmm. But I looked up the playlist.
Oh, no.
I did.
So tell me about Trump's eclectic
I want to know if
music.
Just guess a couple. Like, you think a dance party, like we're going to rile up the crowd and have a good time, right? So what is maybe a song you might think?
Well, there was one I know that riled up the crowd, and that was YMCA.
Well,
he was very emphatic about playing that.
Of course, always. Props to him. That is absolutely a must.
But the clip that I saw with dancing in the background was Ave Maria.
Yes.
I don't know what dance craze goes with Ave Maria.
He did play Ave Maria.
And danced to it.
Oh, he did?
Yes. With his signature, like taking a towel and rubbing it. I thought it was so weird.
Okay. I wish right now this was a video recording, because
or it's like the floss. I don't know what he was
that
doing.
gesticulation, if there's another word we can have edited out, you just did was amazing.
I apologize.
Props to you. Okay, so yes, another song, Hallelujah.
Another dance
Nothing
favorite.
gets the crowd, excited by that. But here's, ironically, Time to Say Goodbye. I mean, the irony is lost.
They don't get irony. They do not get irony.
Nothing Compares to You, which I can kind of see where he was going
That's on brand for him.
there. But, again, not really an energizing song.
Yeah.
An American Trilogy. So I'm not sure how we could unpack that. But yes, November Rain and Memory. I mean, just some odd choices.
Odd choices.
And then Richmond, north of Richmond.
I have no idea.
I don't even know.
As the music was playing and the former president did his signature move, it was interesting to watch the people on stage with him, because they didn't know how to react. Mm-hmm. And I mean, sadly, and I really genuinely mean this, sadly, it was like them watching someone elderly that didn't know how to stop what they were watching. And
and this is the hard thing to talk about, because we can kind of laugh at the playlist,
sure,
and we're just, again, guys, it's a stressful time in our country. No matter where you fall, it's just emotions are heightened, and we're trying to all process this, and one of the ways we do so is through laughter. Mm-hmm. But then when you start talking about, I know I've seen articles, people comparing him to folks who are experiencing cognitive decline. Right. I don't feel comfortable commenting on that right now. I just don't.
Yeah. No, I don't think, I agree. I do not want to criticize anybody if they are generally going through that kind of experience. And so I hope that's not the case. I hope that we can continue the robust debate on the issues that are at stake in this country, and the reason why we think Trumpism is very dangerous to democracy and the Christian faith, because it is fueled by Christian nationalism, but would never, ever decry somebody or criticize somebody for their mental state or their cognitive decline. And I hope that's not the case with the former president. I truly do. I do not wish that upon anybody, because we have had family members who've suffered from that, and we do not wish that on anybody. But it was a strange time and a strange moment in this election.
I feel like we're living in some strange times.
Yeah, absolutely. Personally and as a country. And thankfully, Missy, there are people out in the world that can help us with some of this really heavy experiences that we're having as people and as a country. And I'm so thankful that we were able to have Jamie Marich on the show this week.
Yeah, so we met Jamie at the Wild Goose Fest this summer and decided she was somebody we needed to continue a conversation with. Mm-hmm. She is a trauma therapist, specifically working in the field of religious trauma and other areas as well. But she has written a memoir telling her own story and how she came up in this world and how she ended up where she is. And it's really fascinating. It's a great conversation and a really great book.
Yep. So we will be right back with Jamie Marich, who just released her new book, You Lied to Me About God, a memoir. So we'll be right back.
So much of what I learned in church was about doing instead of being. Pray this prayer. Affirm this belief. Save your soul. But doesn't our faith teach us that there's nothing we can do to earn or escape God's love? I'm Brett Harris, host of God Knows Where, and if we can't do anything, then I think we need to better understand who we're supposed to be. Join me for Wayfinding, a new series exploring Jesus' parables to discover who God calls us to be. Find God Knows Where on your favorite podcast platform.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us on a very special day. Dr. Jamie Marich is the author of over 15 books and manuals in the field of trauma, recovery, and expressive arts. With her work increasingly appealing to wider audiences than her clinical colleagues, Jamie seeks to create material that facilitates transformation for the reader. She currently has many projects in the works with her primary publisher, North Atlantic Books, and she also generates many of her own outside-the-box publication through her own company, Creative Mindfulness Media. She is particularly excited about her latest release, You Lied to Me About God, a memoir, coming out this week. In this project, she shares her life experiences with spiritual abuse and how she found a path to recovery and healthy spirituality. Jamie, congratulations on the book and welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Thank you for that hearty welcome. Thanks for your congratulations, and so happy to be here.
So, Jamie, thank you for joining us today. As Mitch mentioned in the intro, you're the author of over 15 books. You are a prolific writer and, in the field of trauma and recovery, but this is your first memoir. So I would like to know, before we dive into the book itself and its contents, why is this the right moment to take on such a personal project?
Sure. So a lot of my books I describe as having memoir-ish quality, because even in writing about trauma and addiction and recovery, of course, I share from my lived experience. I don't think I could write it any other way. And in the professional field, that's sometimes welcomed and that's sometimes met with a bit of, she's getting too personal, not clinical enough. And since my beginning of my career as a trauma educator, I have long amplified, highlighted that spiritual abuse, religious trauma is a real thing, and we have to discuss it as part of our larger discourse about trauma and recovery. And for a lot of years, people have asked, well, when are you going to do the book on spiritual abuse? When are you going to do your take on spiritual abuse and religious trauma? And I even told my own publisher, I can't do it unless I can get 100% personal with it.
Right.
Because that's how personal spiritual abuse and religious trauma is to me. So North Atlantic Books doesn't usually do memoir, but I asked them how they would feel about me writing this book as a memoir. And I just got a lot of support about it. And of course, you're still going to learn a thing or two from trauma recovery, from my voice as a clinical professional, because that's part of who I am. So that will inevitably come through. Yet I just could not write about this unless I could do it from that very personal place. So now felt like the right time, and here we are.
Well, I really appreciated the book, and as Missy said, just the personal connotations that you mentioned within the book. And there's one chapter, Jamie, that just stood out to me. And I mean, I have been doing a lot of deconstructing myself. I am a citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation and learning more about my ancestry and heritage. So let's talk about the chapter titled Roots. You've got a lot going on, Jamie. I mean, you have some Croatian, Serbian, and Hungarian ancestry in your background, and I love what you write about it. You wrote, "My ancestors, I'm asking you to guide my mind, my heart, and my hands as I share your stories in offering context for my own. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
How important context is for generational and cultural effects that weave their way into your life experience. Jamie, thanks for writing this chapter.
Oh, goodness, yes. My cultural roots have been so important to me, and I think that comes through in the chapter. What further necessitated me weaving it in is the nations you mentioned, Croatia, Serbia, Hungary, all parts of what we might consider the Balkan or the Slavic nations of Eastern Europe, have been at war or at conflict with each other for many centuries.
Right.
And even my great grandfather, Milij Masičić, who I write about quite a bit in the book, he has shown up a lot for me as an ancestral guide. He has shown up in my therapy. I've seen pictures of him and have felt connected to him, as I have felt connected to a lot of my ancestors and to the country of Croatia. I also talk about in the book how I spent 3 years there from 2000 to 2003. And I feel that, yes, even though I had some professional reasons to go over there, I believe I had to live in that country to really get well. And
Right.
I go into that full story in the book as well. Because I do think when we talk about family roots and ancestral lineage, a big lesson that I have learned is those of us who embody white skin, we have to do that work too, because we can sometimes think that intergenerational trauma is only something that people with darker skin have experienced, or that when we talk about, and I mention scholars in the book like Resmaa Menakem and other folks who have really challenged me as a white person, that a big part of how we heal a lot of what we consider to be ancestral trauma, racial trauma, is people with white skin. We have to do our own work too about these kinds of issues. And so there's just been a lot of baggage in my family line. And it didn't start with what I was born into. And I've just had the privilege to do a lot of digging. Part of it is it's just something that's always interested me. So when the war was happening in Croatia and Bosnia in the early 90s, I just felt a connection to what was happening and I wanted to learn more. My parents, as I mentioned in the book, were both in Croatian folk groups when they met. And so it's not an exaggeration to say I'm alive because of the ancestral traditions of my people being carried on here in the US. But there's just been a lot to learn about where my family has come from. And I think for a lot of us with white skin, it's sobering to consider how a lot of baggage was brought here with us.
Yeah.
And so I've had to unpack a lot of that in my therapy, and I was happy to share some context for that in the book.
And that's got to be really surprising, especially in your clinical work, Jamie. People are dealing with a variety of issues. And when you begin this conversation about heritage and ancestral trauma, that's maybe something that is unexpected for them, that they didn't even realize was present in their life. Have you discovered that in your clinical work?
Yes. Yes is the short answer. That when a lot of people come in for clinical struggles or problems, it's this thing is happening with me, fix it now.
Yeah, sure.
There has been a wider understanding about the role that trauma or wounding or mistreatment that we experience at the hands of each other can play in causing clinical distress. So many people have been more open in recent years to talking about family of origin dynamics, for sure, what I actually grew up in. Even there, you can get some resistance, though. And some of that's religious in nature, right?
Sure.
Where people say, like, I grew up in a beautiful home. I had beautiful, I've even had some folks who had beautiful corrective punishment in the home. And then the more we explore it, it's like, no, that's abuse. That's trauma. That's wounding. Right. So getting people to have awareness about trauma has been a challenge. And it has been an interesting step to get folks to think even wider, that it's not even just your family of origin, that they came from families of origin and they came from families of origin, and that can continue to get passed on until someone addresses it.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Jamie, you just brought me back to my childhood. And I love and
Uh-oh.
adore my dad. But when he would pull the belt out and say, this is going to hurt me a lot worse than you, it was like, as a kid, it was
yeah.
like, really? I'm not understanding this at all. But he continued that as, he was a victim of that kind of mindset as well. So
For sure, yeah.
So, Jamie, that's a good segue into your own story. So, I want to back up a little bit and say that I met you last summer at the Wild Goose
Yes.
Fest and went to a little round table discussion in which it was a small group and everybody was kind of supposed to share. And you shared a little, brief, intro of your story. And I just wanted to say, no, wait, you keep talking, because
Aw.
I thought your background was so interesting and unique. We spend a lot of time talking to folks who have religious trauma. And typically what we hear of is you come out of a home that was extreme fundamentalist background. Your story is a little bit different and quite interesting to me. So tell us kind of, I guess, the jumping off point for your memoir and your story about your background.
So I got it simultaneously from two different brands of Christianity. I say brands, just kind of, they were
We'll go with it.
denominations,
We'll call
right?
it.
Well, we'll go with that. So yes, I grew up with one evangelical parent and one Catholic parent, and they chose to stay married. My parents were married Roman Catholic. Most Croatians are Roman Catholic, and that's the lineage that they come from. And when I was about 5, my father officially converted to a charismatic Pentecostal evangelical group. He was converted by several of the late night televangelists in the 1980s who are known and popular to many of us. And I was the oldest child. I was aware that all of this was happening as it was happening. I mean, at the time it was presented very much as, Papa's not going to go to church with us anymore. But then he progressively started bringing a lot of his religious beliefs home, because the particular type of evangelical Christianity he espoused to really believed that Catholics were going to hell.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, it was like my mother and his parents and my mother's parents and everybody in the family was bound for this fiery destination unless they got saved as he defined it. And, there was a lot of tension that I was attuned to right away, because my mother stayed in her resolve to remain Catholic, and she really believed in her Catholic tradition. I would say at some point she even doubled down on it a little more, because it was being threatened. And so she was just insistent that we agreed to raise the kids Catholic. You kids are going to keep going to Catholic school. But then my dad also wanted to take me to evangelical service. And part of my mom's just Catholic belief was, you don't get divorced. You stick through this. You want to keep the family together at all costs. And I even reference in the book how some of her family members were like, it would be okay if you left, because this is a lot to have to live with.
Right.
And so, yes, I got a lot of shaming theology both places. In my story, it was much worse on the evangelical side. Even though I have a lot of problems with modern Catholicism, they were fundamentally a softer, gentler place for me, where I felt I fit in a little better. But I was volleyed back and forth between both churches, was the crux of a lot of my upbringing. I would go to Catholic Mass at 9:00 on Sundays after having gone to Catholic school all week. And then my dad would take me to the evangelical service at 10:30. And then eventually I would do Wednesday night youth group. And every time I spent in the car with my dad, Rush Limbaugh was playing in the back. And that would also be kind of a training ground for a lot of this Christian nationalist theology that seems new to a lot of people since the last
been around
5-10
a while,
years. But oh, this is what I was raised with. I'm like, this is what they've wanted all along. So that was what upbringing was like. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you talk about in the book kind of being stuck in the middle between your parents quite often, and forced to kind of try to make that decision of who's right and who's wrong. And you're 9-10-year-old kid, being forced to be the determining voice. I mean,
and I tell the story in the book that I think is representational of so much. I'm about 8. And it was the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, which is December 8th, I believe, on the Catholic calendar, the doctrine that Mary was born without sin. And of course, my father believed that that was hogwash, and really almost any teaching about Mary was horrible, and Catholics worshiped Mary, which they don't, but that's how it was framed. And as they were arguing back and forth over dinner, they both turned to me at what felt like the same time and asked me what I thought.
Yeah.
And you're 8, right?
I'm 8. Yes, I'm 8. And I tell the story as well at my grandmother's funeral, my mom's mom, when I'm 16. And I'm asked to do a reading at her Catholic funeral, but it was a reading from a book that isn't in the Protestant Bible. And just having this sense of fear and dread that I'm going to be in trouble with my dad. And as I look back on my childhood, at the time, it was part of the normal that this is just the dread that was very normal to me. Now looking back, especially having gone through some deconstruction and a lot of therapy and knowing what I know as a therapist, that's just horrible to put a kid in that position, to have to mediate doctrinal debate. But I think a lot of the things we do with kids in theology are horrible.
Yeah.
True.
Yeah.
All right, Jamie, I want to read this quote to you.
Sure.
You write, as a person living with dissociative identities as a result of my own trauma, it feels like I am parenting the 3 internal daughters, myself at age 4, 9, and 19, who live inside me and compromise my system.
Comprise
my system.
Comprise, yeah.
So you're very open about this in the book. So first of all, can you describe to our listeners what dissociative identities is about and how it impacts you?
Sure. Well, I want to use this as a chance to say that whenever someone speaks out against the church or authority or men in power, a common comeback is, well, she's just mentally ill. And I'm leading with, yes, I am. I have been diagnosed and treated for mental illness for most of my adult life. And one of the reasons I'm leading with that is I don't think it's anything to hide.
Right.
And if anything, what I'm sharing in this book is what has made me this way. And, you know, I'm largely in a state of recovery right now. I've been clean and sober for 22 years. But dissociative identities, a lot of what's known to the public is dissociative identity disorder, formerly multiple personality disorder. I have what is generally considered a milder form of it, in that, like, I don't blank out or lose sections of time, but I do have 3 to 4, because there's a bit of a shape shifting there, separate and distinct parts that developed at different parts in my development. And so, yeah, I can kind of shift or switch perspectives very quickly. The switching doesn't happen with any kind of rapidness. Typically, I would say when I'm under stress, it can. And all of a sudden, it may feel like, even though I'm in this adult body, you are talking to somebody who's discoordinated and a lot younger, right? But the parts of me really did develop at these very vulnerable ages. And that's often how dissociative parts form. When we're living in a traumatic situation that is so overwhelming, our brain can't cope with it all. Another part may form to help us carry some of it. And in my experience, the major parts that I developed really did happen at the time that I went through some pretty horrendous traumatic experiences, and a lot of them were spiritual in nature. Like this 4-year-old part, which I define as a lot of my childhood trauma, makes sense now to me looking back, because that was around the age when my father was converting and exploring his new faith, and I was just picking up on a lot of that tension in the home. I do tell the story in the book that inevitably some people will see as too dramatic, but it is my story.
Right.
That when I was about, I had just turned 5, and my dad forced me to pray the Jesus prayer. I accept you in my heart, dear Jesus, as my Lord and Savior. And it was very much framed as a choice, but it can't possibly be a choice when you're 4 and you're just trying to keep a parent happy.
Absolutely.
And in context of some other things that were going on in my life too, it just makes a lot of sense that I would kind of have this part that really represents a lot of the development that arrested at 4. So I've written other books on this. I have a book called Dissociation Made Simple. I think dissociation is something that anybody who has grown up in spiritual trauma has experienced. It may not necessarily develop into a full disorder with kind of separate and distinct parts you have to navigate. But dissociation is anytime we split off, anytime we sever or divide from the present moment, especially when that present moment becomes overwhelming. I think for a lot of us, we had to stay dissociated in order to withstand a lot of what we were asked to withstand in church. Especially if what church was kind of shoving down our throats was so against who we authentically know ourselves to be.
Well said.
So throughout the book, you find your way into various communities and practices that have helped you along your healing journey. But you're pretty quick to recognize, you talk about when those communities cross over into cult or cult-like behavior. And given I was just thinking about that as I was reading, I was like, well, we all have such a need to be part of community. And I feel like a lot of us, no matter what, are seeking that out in some way. So talk to us about that line and when your kind of red flags start to raise of when a community, religious or not, kind of crosses over.
Yeah, I'm still dancing with that question myself, because
you're supposed to have the answers, Jamie.
I know, right? Like a good cult leader.
Right. And there you have it, scene.
There you have it, and scene. Yeah, I think that is why a lot of people get into cults or cultish institutions. Because yeah, you're right. Something I explore in the book is how, even though I would stop short of calling certain churches and institutions full-on cults, there's a lot of cultish activity, cultish dynamic that happens in there. And I go into a little bit to the book how you fundamentally need to decide for yourself. But a lot of, I think, why we get roped in, if I can use that term, part of it is this want for community and connection. I think that's very normal. I do think that cult leaders or pastors or institutions or priests can know how to exploit that to make people feel like, well, this is where you get your belonging. And if you leave, you're not going to find belonging anymore. And I'm here to tell you, on the other end of this, if you do decide to step away, there is a whole vast community of us who are here to say, we get it.
Yeah.
And I just remember years ago being in church, especially as that 9-year-old kid praying for the rapture, thinking like there must be something wrong with me that I want out of this, that I am the only person here who, and I didn't have this language at the time, but is different. And now to see how many of us had such similar stories of suffering and a lot of high control religion, you'll find the community, you'll find the belonging. I think the problem is a lot of us are raised in families or homes where we're told that community is only one thing.
Right.
Right.
Well, I double underlined a quote from that, from the book. Says, it's up to us as seekers to determine how much of our power we are going to give away or whether or not we are going to use spiritual practices to empower ourselves. And I thought that was such a great way to put that. And that's something you constantly have to check yourself with. Is this a practice? Is this something that is empowering to me, or am I giving away my power? So
it's really cool to hear people read back quotes to me. Like, well, I wrote
girl,
that. Yeah,
I've got a page full of quotes. We can do this all day long.
She gave me the book, and it was like earmarked with all kinds of chicken scratch on it. It was,
thank you.
Really well done. So let's talk about one of those types of therapies that helps you along your journey of wholeness, and that is EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing therapy. So tell our audience, Jamie, a little bit about what that is and how it helped you.
Sure. So it's a therapy that will sound strange and bizarre on the surface if you haven't experienced it. It's one of those therapies where when I was recommended to have it done 20 years ago, when I was in graduate school, my first thought was, I wonder if this is an okay therapy in the eyes of the evangelical church, even though I was already out of it.
My guess is no.
Well, so here's what's interesting about it is I have trained a lot of evangelical folks now in EMDR therapy. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. In a very nutshell, definition. It uses back and forth eye movements or other what we call back and forth bilateral stimulation. So you could be tapping a drum, you could have ear tones in your ears going back and forth. And that's bilateral movement gets to what is essentially the middle and lower areas of your brain that we cannot easily get to by words. And when we talk about trauma being activated and the rational mind being hijacked when we're trauma triggered, it's because we can't easily get to where those points of activation are by words. And so in 1989, there was a California psychologist who was doing some experimentations with this, and she wrote it up as a protocol that therapists can learn. And it was really seen as very skeptical at first because it seemed bizarre. But, you mentioned, Mitch being of Native lineage, that really what we're doing with this therapy is similar to what Native elders have done since the dawn of time by using drumming and dancing and stomping and walking in nature, that this saccadic back and forth movement really helps us get deeper in our brain. So it was the therapy that I received 20 years ago when I was in my kind of second active deconstruction, because I deconstructed evangelical. And then I was wandering for a few years. Then I got real Catholic again. And then I was in my second deconstruction period, really coming to terms with things about my own trauma and sexuality. I had a lot of therapy at that point. I had gotten clean and sober through the 12 steps. I knew a lot of the 12-step answers to things at that point. And I just needed something different. And I remember going into EMDR saying, with that, I heard about this therapist. She's really unique and unusual. I would even do hypnosis or I would do Reiki or something like that. A lot of these therapies that were definitely no in the eyes of evangelicals and a lot of Catholics too. But EMDR is really so finely scientifically researched at this point that yes, inevitably a lot of Christian people will probably put it down. But I've also trained a lot of Christian therapists who are very for it. Right now, I remember a big full circle moment I had was about 6 years ago. An entire agency of evangelical based Christian therapists signed up for it. And I made sure I talked to all of them. Like, I just want you to know about my background. And there was just a receptivity to, yes, a lot of trauma happens in the church and a lot of folks in the church experience trauma at the home. And we want to give them some tool to be able to, really work with it. So EMDR is powerful treatment. To me, I'm never one of those where this therapy is the only answer. This therapy is the panacea. Because I even write about that in the book, that when I first got trained in EMDR and I started to go around the clinical community, the trainers, there was almost this cultic-like devotion to the founder and to the method. And all of my bells and whistles from growing up evangelical went off at that point. Like, I like this therapy, but I'm not going to join a cult. Unfortunately, I haven't had to, because the community of therapists doing EMDR is pretty wide and diverse. And I think, like with a lot of institutional-based community, academia is this way, that a lot of academia can be very cultish and built around the institution. And you have to fall in line in order to fit in order to have that community. So I've just been somebody, whether it's my spiritual path, whether it's my professional path, where I've learned rules where I've needed to, and I've learned good technique because I train EMDR therapy now. I've written books about it, but I've also learned how to forge a path for myself with it, because ultimately the clients I serve with EMDR therapy need to be met as individuals.
Well, I'm so glad you explained that to us, because I know it's just, I've been hearing it more and more in our circles, people talking about EMDR. And so when we saw that section in the book, I was like, I want to ask you to talk about this, because it is something that's just becoming, I don't know, more talked about in our circles.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, because it is really powerful treatment that helps us shortcut a lot of the BS, if I can put it that way. Because a lot of times we come into therapy and we can talk ourselves into circles. And it's not to say that talking isn't an important part of the healing process, because especially for many of us who were told our thoughts, our opinions didn't matter, we may need to talk when we come to therapy, especially at first. But there comes to a certain point where we can tell the same stories and nothing moves, nothing shifts. And that's because there's just such powerful activation at these the limbic brain, the amygdala, the places of the brain that really kept us safe. It's like it set a panic button that never unset. And when those panic buttons set and we are in situations where we learn messages about ourselves, like I'm an abomination, or I'm not good enough, or God doesn't love me, those may need to be processed through. And not just with words, but with the body, with your emotions. And there's something about back and forth motion that can really help us go deep in the brain. And it's been a privilege. It's been a privilege to be able to receive a lot of EMDR therapy myself over the years and to guide others through it, especially those who have religious trauma, spiritual abuse.
So, Jamie, the book is titled "You Lied to Me About God," and I think anyone who grew up in any sort of religious dysfunction can relate to so many of the ways in which you were lied to about God, and examine the ways that we were lied to about God along the way. So, I want to know, in this day, where do you find truth about God in your life?
Love that question. The biggest truth I've learned about God is that God can show up however they want to. I do a whole kind of rant in the book about how God has no pronouns for me.
Right.
God lives inside my heart and is not a big angry man up on a cloud. And it actually helps me. I think it's unproductive to feel pity for people, but I do feel sad for a lot of folks in my family and other folks who are still worshiping in containers, churches, etc., where God is presented as only one thing.
Right.
And I think the people who are traditionally religious that I can still respect and still do respect are those who do see that God shows up in a variety of religions, in every country, in a variety of planes. And that is a big truth I know about God today.
I love that.
And a big truth I've learned about myself is that one of the messages of the book is that so many lies were told to me about myself in God's name. And the truth that I have learned today, after a lot of suffering, a lot of therapy, navigating through addiction, navigating through loss, is that God made me as I was intended to be made. And that the more I've embraced my full self and living authentically, the more I actually love and appreciate and respect God.
I love that.
Well, Jamie just went to preaching.
She did. Okay. Well, before we get, I know you want to get to the last question, but before we do that, I just want to say, as I'm going to quote you back to yourself again, the moment in the book, which was pretty near the beginning, that I knew I was going to love the book and you, was the sentence, "Perhaps the most sacred, nourishing thing you can do for yourself is to binge watch a few episodes of Schitt's Creek." And I just thought,
Man, you were speaking her language when you wrote that.
You may not know, but Moira Rose is one of the patron saints of our podcast.
How utterly safansifying. I love that.
Adore her. And so it brought to mind I have favorite quotes listed in my phone from her.
Great. Lovely.
But I thought one that kind of related to your book. She says, "Sometimes the eye won't allow the brain to see things at first." And I thought that theme through the book and through a lot of our lives is sometimes we know something's not right, but our brain can't process it yet. So anyways, I just wanted to share with you that we both share that kind of response to things when they're stressful. Just binge watch a few episodes of Schitt's Creek and all will be well.
Well, Dr. Jamie Marich,
what a gift that show was to the world.
It is.
It has been a pleasure visiting with you today. The book is titled "You Lied to Me About God," a memoir. Pick it up immediately. Do not stop or pass go. Go and purchase this book because you will really, really be challenged by it, but also be inspired by it. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being with us on Good Faith Weekly. But before we let you go, Jamie, we've got one last question that we ask all of our guests, and Missy has the honor of asking it. So, Missy, take it away.
So, Jamie, as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So, in light of your work and our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
There's so much. I just wrote 288 pages about it. But if I had to summarize it, and wow, just know that religion could be something really wonderful.
Mm.
And unfortunately, it has turned into, and maybe a lot of institutions always saw it this way, as a vehicle to control people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yet it can be a path where you can really find your freedom. You can realize, I'm just hitting on all the highlights I've said so far on the show, right?
Right.
That God is bigger than God's been presented to you, that God lives within you, and that God wants you to be the truest version of yourself. Because anything else, as far as I'm concerned, is just imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes God very sad to see us locked up in jails.
Mm. What an ending. Well, Dr. Jamie Marich, again, the book is You Lied to Me About God, a memoir. Also, Jamie has written for Good Faith Media on our website. She's got several articles there, so check those out at goodfaithmedia.org. But Jamie, you are always welcome on the pod. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And good luck on the book tour.
Thank you so much. Thank you for a beautiful conversation. And let's keep being loud that we can encounter God in other ways. Love it.
Well, Missy, I really appreciated our conversation with Jamie, learned so much, not only about her personal life, but about trauma at large and ways in which it can be treated.
Right. And in our follow-up conversations, it's funny because as I read through the book and I really wanted to ask a question about the EMDR therapy. I think it's right. Yeah. EMDR. I might get the acronym wrong or mixed up. The eye movement. Because I really have been hearing about this quite a bit in our circles. And so I wanted her to explain it a little bit. You were really fascinated with the roots chapter, talking about kind of generational effects of conflict and trauma. And our conversations post-interview have really kind of melded those two things, because she mentioned towards the end about Native drumming and the stepping and things, and we're not real sure how that connects, but you and I both immediately have gone to Google to start looking into this.
The oracle
because
of all
it's like
life, right?
a connection was made in your mind especially.
Yeah. You know, and I connected the chapter on roots with the chapter on MDR that really resonated with me. So going back to, Jamie's assessment of her heritage and her doing a deep dive into that heritage and the conflicts that she finds within herself. I've talked about it on this pod. I've written about it extensively. I've spoken about it publicly, about my struggle with identity. Because as an Indigenous person, I'm constantly trying to figure out who I am, because I have grown up as Mitch Randall in this very Anglo-centric world that is filled with, Christian nationalism and all the things that are associated with that. But at the same time, I have really appreciated my Native American culture as a citizen of the Muskogee Nation. And so I've been unpacking all of that. And the further I get into that deconstruction and reconstruction of my identity, trying to figure out who I am. Am I this, white kid that grew up in suburban Tulsa, Oklahoma, or am I in this Indigenous person with, years and years of trauma associated with my people? So it's that really resonated with me as she told her story. But as she told that story, and as she talked about the importance of kind of the rhythmic, I don't know how I would describe this, but kind of the rhythmic comfort.
She kind of talked about the drums and the stepping. She didn't really get to go into it, so I don't want to misspeak on it.
No.
I don't want you to, but I want to, because it made so much sense to me as well from going to those powwows with you. Yeah.
So, there's something about that drum when you go to a powwow that, first of all, the entire experience, from the social setting that centers around the circle to the dance circle itself, centers on the drum. And the musicians who are, singing and playing the drum are all there together, and they're operating as one. So there's this synchronization of individuals coming together to collectively make one sound. And it's this beautiful indigenous experience that communicates how out of many come one. Have you heard that before?
I feel like I have. I feel like, is it maybe, am I speaking, is it on our money?
I think it is on our money. I think it's our national motto.
But it's on our money. We'll unpack that later.
But it's this beautiful experience that is centered on this rhythmic continuation. And it's almost this rhythmic beating of the drum has this kind of internal, it has an internal, but also this eternal effect on you. That the rhythm has always been there and will always be there for you if you're listening.
It's a very transcendent experience.
Very transcendent.
I can attest to that.
And so I'm about to tell you a story I have never told you before.
Is it appropriate?
Of course it's appropriate.
That's right, because it's you. Okay, go on.
Yeah, if this was vice versa, we would ask Cliff to do some editing here. Yeah. But I was in seminary, and it was actually before you and I met. And I had one of those semesters where I was writing, 2 to 3 papers a week, 2 to 3 tests a week. It was just a really, really daunting semester. And I finished up the semester, and I remember turning in my last paper and coming home to my apartment, and I was by myself. And I turned on the boom box with the cassette tape.
What's that?
Yes, exactly. And because long ago, my dad gave me this, it used to be a record, and I recorded it onto cassette tape, of Muskogee drums. And it was a powwow. And I turned it on, and I just started listening. And and as I listened to song after song, the music began to just kind of sweep over me. And you have seen me dance to white music.
Sight to behold.
I am not a good dancer. But at that moment in that time, I let the music just sweep over me, and I started to dance. But not in a dance floor,
not in a wedding reception kind of way.
I danced like my ancestors. And I can't tell you how therapeutic that was.
Wow.
I mean, it was as though my ancestors were there with me. They were saying, well done, you did it, keep going. And everything had to do with the drum. My feet hit the ground as the drum beat. The movements were in synchronization with the drum. And it was this total, transcendent moment that I had as an individual between me, my heritage, and the rhythmic music of the drums that I'll never forget.
That's really powerful. And I know from our experiences of going to events and powwows and things that just what it's like to sit there and as an observer, it is a very powerful and transcendent experience. And so now with what, Jamie has kind of that door she is open to that. I'm so fascinated with that brain, connection in that rhythmic movement, in that eye movement, in that brain connection, because it makes sense that that kind of thing, you've got to rewire your brain. It's almost as if God gave us what we needed and gave us the intuition and the knowledge from the beginning. We've just messed it up all along the way, right?
I believe so. I mean, and what's really fascinating to me is that we had to do some scheduling things, and I'm telling that story this week because we had Jamie on the pod. And what was Monday?
Indigenous Peoples Day.
There is a God.
Right.
And I don't know what her name is, but there is a God.
Okay, side note, do you know what Wednesday was?
Oh, geez, what?
Boss's Day. It's
Hey.
been a big week for you.
It has been a big week for me.
Indigenous Peoples Day and Bosses Day.
Yeah.
I guess I should buy you a drink.
Yeah, cheers. Well, anyway, we really appreciate Jamie coming on the pod this week. She gave us a lot to think about. We hope that she gave the audience a lot to think about as well. So check out her new book that is titled You Lied to Me About God, a Memoir. It is really good, and I think will give you a lot to think about.
Right. And check out her website as well. You can Google Jamie Marich and find her. She has just a
Lots of
plethora
resources.
of resources.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, Missy and I will be back. We promise we won't be talking about our house all the time.
I mean, if it's funny, we will.
Yeah, well, true. And who knows? Kat may show up again in our stories next week. So until then, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.